she's on her way.
I'm just in there saying birthday stall.
Because we're 6 feet. Me too.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's governing board meeting. Let the record show that all 5 board members are present and we do have a quorum. Mrs. Sagata-Jones, do you have any changes or recommendations for the agenda?
No, Madam President, not this time.
Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. At this time, please join me in a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any calls to the public?
Madam President, no at this time.
Thank you. And we will start on item 4, study session.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, this evening we'll begin with the study session. We have 2 pieces of study session. The first part of that study session will focus on reopening of GSD, and then the second piece will be on the request of the board discussion on goals. So if you would refer to your packet in the manila envelope that has the outline of what we'll be discussing, we'll be using the information in this packet. In addition, you had received all of the task force committee work by school. You received that. You received all of the surveys from both staff and families as well. And so that information you were sent last week to review. So we'll refer to those documents as well. And what we'd like to present to you now is just an overview of the things that we've been discussing. And then each of these items we'll discuss, and we can take questions at any time about what they mean. So as you all know, it's a very fluid situation. We just left listening to the press conference from the governor, and then yesterday we received the governor's executive order. So that is very fluid, and of course it changes anything that we might have stated previously. So I want to make sure you understand, again, it's fluid, and we'll just make adjustments as we go forward. So the first item shows health and safety of all students, staff, and community. I would say that is our number 1 priority right now. And with that, you have documents that show COVID-19 cases in the zip codes. There's a map there for you that show the zip codes in which our district lies. So 85301, 85302, and 85303. On that map, you'll see it's highlighted in red of the number of cases that surround our GSD community. You'll see at 302 is 519 cases, 03 is 483 cases, and 01 is 908 cases. So we do have a significant number of cases here within our school district boundaries. So I wanted to make sure you have that information. The next piece I want to discuss with you is the City of Glendale proclamation. So it's a legal interpretation and the GSD response. So Mayor Wires came out with the Glendale proclamation, which you should have a copy of. And within that, he has required that in public, all Glendale residents will, or anybody that's in Glendale, will wear a face covering. We asked for legal interpretation on that. It does not specifically state in there, that schools fall under that jurisdiction. So under the legal counsel, schools do not fall under that. If we are open to the public and having the public come in, then yes, they fall into that. So when you come into the district office, or if you were coming into a local site, that would be the mask requirement at this time. But the city cannot, in their jurisdiction, tell a school district whether or not they have to wear face covering. So I just make sure we understood that. So what we did as a GESD response is we did post on all of our doors that when community was coming in, that they would wear a face covering. And so that has been posted, and I think I shared that with you. So that's the mayor's and the City of Glendale's proclamation. Under the governor's executive order that came out, we asked for legal interpretation for a couple things. The financial responsibility of that and the instructional responsibility of that. So there is still, because that came out late yesterday, legal counsel is still meeting to determine exactly what does all that mean. So I'm going to just give you as an overview of what that means and what legal counsel is still looking at. So in that executive order, there were options for school districts in which they could provide education to their students. So the one is your traditional brick and mortar. They're in person, they come. And with that, you're going to receive your full ADM funding. The second piece of that goes into a hybrid model. The hybrid was defined, that's the part that has to be further developed. The hybrid says, I'm going to skip the hybrid and let me go to the AOI first, okay? Then I'll go back to the hybrid. The other piece was an AOI, approved AOI plan, an on-learn platform learning plan, and that was if it was approved by ADE. So we talked about several board meetings ago, and again last board meeting, that we made the decision to go ahead and apply for an AOI online platform, which we did. That application had to be in by July 1st, so it did not have to have state board approval, but ADE would approve that. That would be a rubber stamp automatically. So yesterday, that AOI plan was emailed. It also has to be emailed and sent via postal mail. So it was emailed. We received notification today that it was received electronically, and it was delivered by the courier today. So that's in place. So we can operate on having a true AOI online learning opportunity for students in the district if that's the direction in which we go. We will have, and I have said that several times, there is a difference between distance learning and a true AOI opportunity for students. So that AOI, and I kind of explain it to be similar to those students that are taking an algebra class, or and better, those students or anybody that's ever taken an online college course or something like that. So that's what that AOI will be. We've submitted that if that's a direction in which we wanted to go. And remember, we wanted to be proactive in case we were forced to close, that we would have another alternative. So that did get submitted. Okay, so that's two. In-person, AOI. And the next one is a hybrid, how we understand it with legal counsel, is you can offer distance learning, which hasn't been clearly defined. All right, so distance learning, and if you offer distance learning with a non-approved AOI, then that's an opportunity you can do. But when you do that, then you have to offer with that the access to all students and all staff, the device, as well as the internet service with that. And then with that, you also have to offer to students the opportunity to come onto campus during your regular school time so that they can get additional support if they should need it or if they need somewhere to stay, all right? So with that, those are the options. The questions that we had, and I'm sure a lot of people have, is defining distance learning. So what we ask of legal counsel, which they're working on, is it's very clear to us the ADM, if they come in brick and mortar, we will get 100% ADM, Mr. Bergen, on AOI, correct?
The short answer is yes.
Yeah, for right now, we know that. And then when you go to the other piece of it, you will get your ADM and be made whole. However, with that comes the stipulations, and in the proclamation, it lists those things, what you have to do, all right, which I already named. The question we have is distance learning. So, for example, if we have parents that would want to come in person, and we have those that are online, because they themselves are already on a true AOI, that means you have your own device, or we could give the device in that situation, but you have your own internet access. We don't provide internet access on an AOI, all right? So that's an option that could be given. So then what about parents that don't have internet access and then don't want their students coming into brick and mortar? And then the question was distant learning. Can we provide learning packets, meaning paper pencil packets? That has not been defined for us, because if we do learning packets, just paper pencil, then they haven't answered for us clearly when we ask legal counsel, does that mean it's at full ADM, or is it an option, or is it the only hybrid model where it's distance learning combined with a non-approved AOI? So that's the question that we have right now. All right, so that's what's in the proclamation. Questions on that part of it? Okay. The next piece of that, then, I'm going to let Mr. Bergen, do you want to address any specific financial responsibilities we have as far as ADM, what that looks like in those different scenarios?
Madam President of the Board, as we're learning, based on the executive order and based what we've read through various forums and or groups, as the superintendent well pointed out, we do believe that if we do the AOI, which traditionally has been you haven't been fully funded because they don't count you as a whole student, because the idea prior to COVID-19 was you're spending less because you don't have a brick and mortar, you have less overhead. I believe the intention is post-COVID or during COVID that school districts could offer AOI and get the full funding for that child. We believe, or as we understand it right now, we believe there's also an attempt through the distance learning, but I think those, as the superintendent pointed out, those are questions that we're still trying to clarify and receive confirmation. So I think the superintendent just stated it very well.
Thank you, Mr. Bergen. Next, on the instructional responsibility, I'm going to let Dr. Peterson and Carvalho just talk a little bit more about the AOI, if that's an option, and how it was created and what it looks like at that point.
Board President, members of the governing board, the AOI application is not for the meek. It's a pretty intense application because you're more or less trying to, a lot of school districts, a lot of high school districts will do it, and it'll become a school within their boundaries almost, so that any student can go to it. So it's a pretty intense application. And so, but we knew we had to do it pretty quickly. So we worked with a few stakeholders to put together what that would look like. And as Superintendent Sagata-Jones said, what we did, some people might confuse AOI, which stands for Arizona Online Instruction, with what we did in the spring. And what we did in the spring is very different than an online learning management system. And so what we had to do is identify how students would enroll, how students would withdraw, how students would get support, how you would deal with special education, how you would deal with ELL, how you would deal with offering every course. So what we did is we, like Superintendent Sagata-Jones said, we want to be proactive. So we kind of went in with the Mercedes model of what we could offer, and then if we didn't feel like we could offer all that, we could always pull back, but we wouldn't have to then reapply to push forward. And so what we did is we applied for a K-8 model because we were, I don't know if the word's concerned, but we were nervous that if an 8th grader, it was okay for a parent to have their 8th grader be online, but they didn't want to send their kindergartner, we might lose that kindergartner too. And so we wanted to make sure that, just in case, we had a K-8 model. We also wanted to make sure that we offered everything, including related arts, as best as we could online in that learning management system. The other thing that a learning management system allows you to do is it allows you to keep attendance. It allows you to say how long a student's been online, if that's what we're required to do. It allows you to say, because they posted 2 discussion posts, plus met with the instructor, plus put in a project on Sunday, they met attendance. So it lets you do a lot of those things that other management systems may not let you do. And so it was pretty intense of a process, but I also wanted to say with that, we also had to identify a professional development system in place as well, not only to professionally develop teachers to instruct online, but also for the students to make sure that they know what's ahead of them. And so depending on all the decisions that we have to make in the next couple weeks, that I would want you to know that there are tutorials out there with our learning management system that we will be moving forward with that shows people what they would be in for, of what that really looks like, because I think, again, a lot of people think, oh, well, we did Google Hangouts or Google Meets or Google Classroom with our teacher in the spring. It must be the same thing. And I see a lot of nods, like people know it's not the same thing. So, but know that we wrote it, again, to be as inclusive as possible with all content and as flexible as possible so that we could offer it in different ways as well. I think the other thing before I end that with the executive order from the governor that also was important in there was that the use of a benchmark assessment within the 6 weeks of the start of school. As you know, we do universal screeners at the beginning of our school year for currently 3rd through 8th grade in ELA and math. And so what we would do is that we already have a system actually in place for rolling assessments to be given for actually kindergarten through 2nd grade. So we actually would be able to already, because we already do that system, we would easily be able to implement that to meet that requirement of the executive order so that we could make sure we know where our kids are at and then get them up to speed as quickly as they can.
So then, thank you, Dr. Peterson-Carvalho. Then also with that piece of the instructional responsibility is the instructional minutes and what does that look like, and then what it has to do with the calendar year. So you would have to still offer your 180 days. You're still offering your instructional minutes, and then your calendar, that calendar that you've adopted, then that is back to the number of days and minutes that you had in the previous year. So that's another piece of that order as well. Okay?
If I may clarify that, though, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, that, and this is probably more for the attorneys to figure out too, is that about going back to last year's calendar and minutes, is if you choose a hybrid model.
Right.
So there's a lot of questions within this hybrid model about what it really means, about what you can and can't do with your current year. But as it is, the AOI And the brick and mortar, like Superintendent Sagata Jones was saying, those do have to also meet 180 days. And the state required minutes for the school year still. The difference is this hybrid model. All of a sudden, if you were to choose that, the way we read it is that you would have to make sure that they still get last year's calendar days and last year's minutes and hours of the school instruction during the school day.
For the hybrid, but if you move into the brick and mortar for this year, you do have flexibility to shorten your day as long as you as a district have enough instructional minutes to do that. Okay, so that's,
Based on last year?
no, current. It's based on your instructional, it's based on instructional minutes that we have to meet statutorily. So, and we'll talk about that when we get to other items as well, but that's the current piece there. Okay, the next piece is then number 4, GSD continuity of operations plan, and they refer to that as the COOP. And so we're required to have a COOP, and we've been working on it. Dr. Louis Lafitte will address that, and you have a table of contents in there that he'll go over with you. With that particular piece, the COOP is part of, you could do it two ways. You could have a separate COOP, and then you, as we already have our emergency operation plan, because there's a lot of pieces that are similar, Dr. Lafitte took the EOP and is meshing it into, blending it, I guess, into with the COOP. So that's what he's been working on. Currently, that is not finished as we still continue to work on what other restrictions we may or may not have imposed upon us by the state. Currently, he has a 48-page document on that will explain explicitly what occurs during such as a pandemic and that, and as well as safety and operations with that. Because, as we said before, that the COVID-19 obviously is consuming, all of us, and what has it done? And I've said that before at the last board meeting, that it's truly changed. Public education has, been changed forever, and it's going to look very differently. Just to manage that piece of it, as you know, is quite time-consuming. So that's why we put in there the reorganization chart, and it's on an action item you've seen later for this evening during the board meeting, is that we would like to take the current position that the Executive Director of Behavioral Health Service and School Safety position that Dr. Lafitte has, and we'd like to make that the school safety position, elevate that to an assistant superintendent, and it's dealing with all those still components. But then strictly it goes into COVID-19 and the COPE, and that goes with all the funding sources with that as well. So you'll see those two org charts. Within that department is still all of the current responsibilities of the social emotional pieces that he does, student behavior, all that is still in there. But because this all falls, a lot of it we're seeing, and you saw that in the surveys from our communities, and you're hearing that when the governor speaks, is that the social emotional well-being of students and staff is critical at this time. So it makes sense for it to be in that organizational chart. So with that, I'm going to let Dr. Lafitte explain what the table of contents and what you can expect in. He'll give a brief overview of that COOP.
Thank you, Superintendent Sagata Jones, Madam President, members of the board. So in front of you, you have a copy of the table of contents. So the document itself at this point is roughly 50 pages, and really the purpose of it is, in the case of an emergency or what we're facing now, which is a pandemic, how do we continue our operations, and what did that continuation of operations look like? And so when we talk about the educational plan, how we provide instruction, when we talk about continuing those essential services such as payroll, things like that, this kind of delineates what each department's specific roles are. What we wanted to do, which is different than a lot of COOP plans that you'll see, is they give kind of just an overview of where to go. We really wanted to be more specific so that we can just then deploy. So once a pandemic or any type of emergency came about, once Superintendent Sagata Jones said it's time for us to move forward, then we could each just move into our specific roles, which part of my role would be to oversee, facilitate, and manage that and provide constant communication and support to bring all those parts together. Each department, which is led by their assistant superintendents and then the directors who support them, they would have their specific roles in that. So an example would be what is transportation specific role in this? And so even if it's something like a train accident, a train was maybe carrying some contagion, and so now what do we do? How do we deploy? What does transportation look like? How do we move? So we really want to make it inclusive of anything that could come our way, and not just focus on this, but use this as a learning lesson and opportunity on how to move us forward. If you notice, there are 5 key sections. Most of the sections are fleshed out. Those sections where they aren't as fleshed out, 3 and 4, are where we have to put in a little bit more of the meat for this. So really a lot of my work in the coming days is to try to flesh that out and to work with as many stakeholders as possible to work through and support that piece. Any questions?
I have actually a question. So I was grateful that ASBA put a seminar or webinar up the other day so that we could understand what the COOP was, and I thought, well, that is real important to have this plan. So I'm grateful that that we're working on this and getting it in place, and because we've had situations, especially when our buildings had to be closed, where we probably needed to have a plan like this in place, so we weren't scrambling as much, and I think that's good. But and then you said for section number 4 that you would get stakeholders in there, and that was one of the things that I just want to make sure in anything that we do, that we have input from our community and our staff in these types of plans, because that's what I got out of when I was listening to it. They're like, because everyone will have some input that could help with the plan. So I would hope at some point that once you have your draft, that people can look at it and that they could give a little bit of input, or we have committees, or they look at it in the safety committees at the school, or just whatever, so that there's more input in there, because they said something like, oh, your bus drivers will might have something that you may not have thought of.
Exactly. We part of the remember when we did the EOP, so that's when we had the committee works that gave their input on the EOP. A lot of that is just transferring over into the COOP, and then when the new pieces, a lot of what you'll see in the new pieces, we gathered that input from when we were gathering all of our surveys, because some of that information is the same. But absolutely, it will be shared with all stakeholders, and we look for their input as we did with the EOP. It'll work that same process. Okay, for the next piece that we wanted to talk about actually were the survey results. So you received all the data on the surveys, and the first one is the staff survey result. And on that staff survey result, I don't have that one right in front of me, but I'll get it in just a minute. But the staff survey results, I want you to remember that that was one of the first surveys that went out. And so that data might have changed, because we asked the questions about their comfort level of returning to work. And it was like a 60-40 split. Now that survey went out when our COVID-19 numbers in Maricopa County were not as high as they are now. So I don't know how that data may remain the same, or it could change. So that would be something we want to keep in mind, because that data has changed. So people's comfort zone might have changed also as well. So keep that in mind. And then on there, it listed, as we shared before, we presented that data at the last board meeting. You remember what their concerns were or their priorities were. So we want to keep that in mind. But again, the one I'm not very sure about is their return rate. Their comfortableness of returning. So we'll talk about some of their other concerns they have, regarding PPE and that this evening as well, because we were trying to address those as well and what that might look like. Then when we did the GSD family survey results, we looked at those as well. And then we did the second survey, and now you have all those results, and you have all the comments by school. And with one of the questions that we really wanted to talk about was that question number 5, and it was, what kind of learning method would you prefer for your child? And then when we looked at, we did it by school for you, and you have that document. It's a 3-page document, family survey, question number 5. And when we looked at that, the results told us everything was either 33% or 34%, 34% on an AOI, 33% on a hybrid, and 33% brick and mortar. My concern with that is truly what online means, if they understand that, but also it was, I don't have that in front of me.
Sorry, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, that's actually the total to make sure that you get to 100. If you look over to the left-hand side of that same document, it's actually not those percentages. It's actually more on the in-person by more than that.
Oh, the 70. I don't have that one in front of me. Mine doesn't show that.
Yeah, so
It's the 70%?
it's like,
What was
it's
the
1,100, I don't know the percent off the top of my head, but it's 1,127 students.
I think that's
I
the
mean,
one.
families that
I
chose
think that's the
online
one
as
he
one.
presented to us in percent. Yep.
Yeah, it was like 50-something, I think, when we did the totals the other day.
When,
Yeah.
right, on this document, my apologies, it's reading hybrid schedule is 33% across the district, in-person is 34%, and online was the 33%. So
And-
the overall, he was trying to get us, there was a question was putting the percentage for 100%. I recall that, I'm sorry. So a little over than half said they would return their students
In
to
person.
school.
Correct.
Yeah, little less than half. Thank you for correcting that. My concern is, I don't know if 54% is changed either with the numbers, if they will still want to return or not, or if it's a higher number that wants to return. The other one that I'm concerned about is the hybrid, because I don't know that we presented a hybrid based on what we thought we could do, and now we pretty much know what we may be permitted to do with the governor's executive order. So I'm not sure if that data is clean either at this point, because we need to really let parents understand if a hybrid is an option, what it might look like. And then again, the online, to be perfectly clear what online is for them as well, which I think we tried to define. So those are the results on that. So what we would want to do, and then also you had with you the GSD task force work. You have that binder, and we gave you that. That was all the input we received from the committees that we established. So in those committees, and I know you've read through those, and I know you'll see some of the similarities that we had. The focus we focused on was the safety and maintenance of the school, the safety committee piece, and each school was represented on the safety piece, and then at the district level as well, and what their concerns were. And then you saw really what the teaching and student piece would look like from each school, and you saw what their concerns were, as well as you saw what some of their options were. And some of their options were similar to what we are being given the opportunity to do. However, distance learning, again, was not clearly defined for them. And so that, I think, until we truly know how the distance learning piece is going to be defined, it's hard to determine which of those options we can offer to our community on those. But when you looked at your comments from the task force, from staff, or when you looked at some of their recommendations that they shared by school, do you have questions about that data that you received in that notebook? Schools wanted, it's very clear they want to be safe. They want to make sure there's some PPE there, and we'll address that as well. They wanted to make sure that there was some flexibility for learning as well. And so those things were clear. All right.
Can I ask a question about the survey and the choices here. How much time are you going to need for parents to actually tell you which way they want to go, so that you have time to prepare, or we have time to prepare?
Mm-hmm. We're on a very fast timeline. I think we have sufficient time to get the information. We have a timeline prepared to share with you, so we'll do that. But the only holdup that we have right now, because we could send it out, first thing in the morning, the only thing is the distance learning has not been defined. So is there an option to do the packets only? And we don't have legal guidance on that, because that hasn't been defined in the executive order clear enough for us. So once we know if that is an option, for example, if one of the options is that you can do packet learning and you can receive full ADM for that, then you would want to possibly offer that to parents. For those that don't want their child in person and they don't want a true AOI, then if they can just get a packet for their child and they're comfortable with that, then is that something that we would want to offer to parents? I think that has to depend on whether that's allowed or not allowed. And then if it is or not, we have to determine, is that what we believe is in the best interest of children? I think it's very clear to us that even any of the options, and I am going to include in-person options, are not maybe the most developmentally appropriate or the best first instruction for any student, because even in the brick and mortar in person, the classroom is going to change and look different, right? It has to. The recommendations in that in person is that kids, stay together in cohorts, so that changes what they're used to. It changes walk to read or walk to intervention. It changes that. It changes the work we've done on small reading groups as well, because of social distancing as well. So it changes all those things. So it's a given that the delivery of instruction is not ideal for students in any of those modes. We don't believe, coming from Ed Services as well, that we would want to operate exactly as we did in the past, because we think we, had strong first best instruction. Not that we can't make it the best that we can, but we all need to understand it's going to look very different for students. Okay, so those would be. So the question on the timeline, then once that distance learning and is answered for us, then we would be able to, our plan is to survey parents very explicitly with questions. Here are the options. You tell us which kids are doing which option, because it could be that you want your students, depending on their age or grade level, to have a different learning experience. So once parents let us know what that learning experience is, then we can quickly make any adjustments as far as how many would be on online, and then how many online teachers would we need for that, and then we would begin that process of asking teachers if they were interested in doing an online approach. So as soon as we get that information, we could turn that around very quickly. But I think we need to talk about, is that an option, distance learning? We don't know what distance learning has been defined yet. Okay.
A question about online learning and instructional minutes. How do you do that? I mean, are you going to just have someone basically teach them for 10 minutes and then they have 40 minutes of homework, to get the instructional time? Do you have?
Yeah, it's outlined in that. Dr. Peterson and Carvalho, do you want to address that?
Madam President, members of the board, in terms of the instructional side of that, and then Mr. Berrigan can talk about the ADM attendance part of that. The instructional part of it, the way that we currently understand AOIs currently work, is that a parent actually signs off on their time, that it's not always what we call in online education land synchronous and asynchronous learning. So synchronous learning is when you truly are with the teacher in live setting and in the moment learning, and then you go learn on your own a little bit, and then you come back to that. Although some of the learning would be synchronous, a lot of AOIs, most AOIs are asynchronous. And that means they are based on, did you do your work? Did you do your discussion questions? And does it have to be at 10 a.m.? No, you could actually do it at 2 p.m. because that actually works for you. But it's within a 24-hour period always, and if they get their projects done. So when Ms. Sagata-Jones was talking about the, is it the best instruction and the best learning that's taking place, you know, we were talking earlier, high school, because it's more content-based, and college, maybe so, maybe not as much in the elementary. I don't know how a student might learn to read with amazingness in kindergarten online, but it would probably be more asynchronous. But Mr. Berrigan knows exactly how that ties, though, to the attendance and the ADM.
Madam President, members of the board, this is something that we're obviously looking at, and I am going to touch a little bit about that in the budget presentation. But what I would also point you to is really going to be the superintendent and Ms. Powell provided you in your packets, the AZ Cares. Really, page 7 also goes into two things. The AOI component of that and how that tracks the attendance piece. The second piece, which goes back to what the superintendent also mentioned, was the distance learning and how do you manage and record attendance in that manner. And so the only guidance that's in that, it's really the last sentence under the first, I guess, bullet point, if you will, the first under student attendance data. You have to, that's something that we're going to have to work with the Department of Ed to figure out what would be appropriate in determining how you monitor and how you account for student attendance, right? I mean, it's a little bit different in the traditional brick and mortar. When you're in the class, the teacher, the staff is taking attendance, and that's registered, and that's, you know, all being calculated. It will be different moving forward, and it's something that, as a staff, our IT folks in SMS, we haven't done it for Glendale Elementary. And I can assure you that our director, Tom Clark, had AOI at his previous district, so he's very familiar with it. But as a school district, it will be a learning opportunity for us to grow. And there's still some, I think, some questions that need to be answered by the Department of Ed or by the powers that be when it relates to the distance learning aspect. And so I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but for the AOI, I think that's a little bit more structured. The distance learning is something that we're going to have to figure out.
I have a question with regards to the employees that may be doing the online instruction if we go that route. Will we be offering for those employees that already have a compromised system or family members so that we're protecting our staff and our families that way?
Well, those are all questions that have to be answered, and those would be, when we met with legal counsel today, it was once we determine what those models might be, then they will help us determine what it looks like and what we need to offer. But those would all be things that we need to consider as well. And then remember, we also have to follow COVID-19, what's required with those that have immunocompromised and what we can do with their rights as well. But all those will be taken in consideration. I think it's clear for us when we looked at the results of the task force committees with our teachers and classified staff and teachers, and that there were options of a hybrid, as they understood the hybrid, and there was online and also in person. But I don't recall seeing anyone that said, let's just give them packets to do, okay? And so that's a piece that, not that the committee, when we will be meeting again, and we'll meet with administration next week as well. Not that that's an option that we may choose or not choose, but I just want to make sure that if we're asked, then why aren't you doing a packet? One, it's because it's not permissible to do, or we say because that's not what the work or the task force will believe or the governing board believe was the best learning opportunity for students. So, but I don't think I can comfortably answer that question right now because it hasn't been defined for me. Okay. Good questions, though.
I have a couple questions. So for the teachers that are going to teach to the online, once we figure out what that is, how much training are they going to get ahead in advance to do that? And is there any kind of, would that be included in the learning management system?
The same with if we decide to go with an AOI. Remember, we just applied for it to be safe, but if we offer, if that turns out to be one of our menu offers to our community, and that's what they want for their students, then it determines how many are there, right? And then yes, there would be training, and then also identifying what are those prerequisites we might want for anybody teaching that. And then obviously there will have to be training for students and staff. There could be many staff members that already know how, once you've taught online, you know what that platform is. And so it's pretty easy. But there has to be, if you have not, there has to be training either way. It'll have to be training for staff, students, and parents as well.
Thank you.
Since we're talking the online, I just want to know, do we know what the high school district is doing? Because we will have parents and families that will have that connection.
I believe he came out. I am in communication with him. Of course, I would not, I don't have any final decisions. He would share that with his community and board. But I believe in the last communication he sent to his community, he said they would offer an AOI, an on-learning approach. Now, he sent that out weeks ago, and we received a governor's executive order yesterday. So I don't know. He's probably scrambling as we are right now.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. First of all, hats off to the task force members that put together this incredibly detailed booklet of information by site here. Which leads me to my first question. Are we expecting to implement this on a site-by-site depending on the population at a particular school site, or is this going to be a district-wide decision? These are the 3 tiers that we're offering.
Based on the governor's executive order, it would be district-wide.
Okay. So seeing that it's district-wide, can we expect, now that we kind of find out more about the difference between the AOI and all the other options and how that affects not only our staff and our teachers, but our budget as well, at some point, is there going to be a task force that kind of consolidates this data so we can kind of look at, what are the recommendations on a district level is what this is going to look like? Because what I've seen, as detailed as this is, there's a lot of assumptions in this task force work because they are dependent upon education models and delivery models that at the time, just 2 weeks ago when some of these were dated, didn't exist. And we had no idea what those looked like. And so we based decisions on the assumptions that we had 2 weeks ago. So those may not even come into play. So other things like food services and libraries and, the music classes and things like that. So all that changes. Are we going to get another task force or at least somewhere along the line, get some people out to kind of consolidate this stuff as soon as we have an idea as to what this delivery model looks like?
Well, I think it's all changed because of the governor's executive order. So now it's a matter of we will bring administration back in to share with them the executive order, anything we learn from legal counsel from now until when we meet with them next Tuesday, and then they will have the assignment of pulling their task force back together and talking about what those options look like to get additional feedback. I think the information that they have there tells you what their preference is. It's whether or not hybrid can be done or not done, but it goes back to if it's in person or if it's AOI. That's pretty clear in the data. The hybrid, in order to do the hybrid, we would have to provide connectivity for every student that does not have it, and that would not be possible. We cannot pay for internet access for students. You would have to look at thousands of hotspots and what that would look like. So that piece may not, unless there's some change with it, how we understand distance learning, that hybrid model of having to do that, and then as well as going back to those students, if it was that hybrid, remember, you still then have to allow for them during the regular school day to come back and receive services. So I don't know how you run all 3. I've got kids there, And then I know at any given point in time how many are going to come from a hybrid, and then where do they go? And what do they do?
So is there a consideration for certain sets of students or certain students automatically be put into AOI? Because you're going to, I can imagine if you can't have a hybrid and you're limited to either everyone in brick and mortar or everybody in AOI, at what point do you now have too many students that you can't socially distance within a classroom? You know, when you have a sixth grade class with 30 kids in it, and you need to conceivably chop that down at least 30% to try and socially distance those kids. How do we think we're going to manage that if we're not able to sort of move kids onto an online platform or a situation where it can maybe stagger days?
Well, and those are great questions. Remember that with the guidance that's coming from us from the CDC and with the state, Maricopa County Health, and that is, it's the options of social distancing, but also it is the wearing of face covering. And if you have a face covering on, then the social distancing you try to do as well, but then you go with the face covering and you try to social distance the best that you can. If you don't go with a face covering and then you're going to try to take social distancing 6 feet apart, that's going to be the challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you looked back at the parent survey data, there was that question number 5 that asked that, were you comfortable purchasing PPE, or would you send your child with PPE, including wearing a face cloth? And I believe that percentage was, I'm not even going to quote that again because I'm going to look at it, number 5, and it was over 70, number 7 is what it was on your family survey. And do I have that in front of me? Number 7. Yes, 75% it was. I knew it was 70-something. So 75% of your parents were comfortable with that. So that's how you would get to your being able to at least provide some type of safety for your students without the social distancing and then keeping them in a cohort. I do also want to remind us, though, when we talked about this before, we had a great response statistically of 2,300 families. We have 7,300 families close to that did not respond. So that's still, I can tell you what 2,300 want, but I don't know what the other 7,300 want. So that's a challenge as well. All right, the next piece of that would be when we talk about reopening, I think we talked about it's really important for us to look at the social and emotional support that we're going to provide students and staff. And even in the governor's executive order, if you go with those, he mentioned it again in his hybrid, that there also has to be a component of social emotional. Whatever we offer to our students, there will also be built in a social emotional component piece for students, staff, and families as well. Sensitivity to family needs. I think it was clear to us that we know there are families in our community that have lost their jobs, and that's a concern of ours. We have done a really good job of trying to help the best we can with meal services for our families. And what we did in June, we served, last June, we served 26,405 meals. June of this year, we've served 67,042 meals. So we increased the number of meals we served from last June to this June by close to 41,000. So we have tried to meet those needs, and then we've also increased the number of food boxes we've done for families as well. So we need to keep that in mind. Another piece that I've asked our principals who have students who attend uniform schools is to look at being flexible with those dress codes this year, and the fact that if parents can't afford uniforms, obviously we can help try to get those uniforms, but if parents have the ability to have their students in the clothes that they currently have or have the option to wear both, that they be flexible with that, and administration is in support of that as well. Any flexibility that we can offer our students and our families at this time, we need to do that. Even with our schools that are non-uniform schools, what we want is anything that we can do as far as clothing drives to help our students that may need that, not just uniform schools, but any of our schools that will need help with that, we want to be able to do in some way as well. The next piece takes us back to the COVID-19 training for staff, and that will be what we will be providing for staff as well. We've begun some of that while we were doing some of the distance learning, and I'll let Ms. Valadez talk about what that training looks like for staff.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board. So far this year, we've definitely put out workplace guidelines just when this all started, and we started having people come back to work. And even at the beginning, we had some critical, what they call infrastructure employees that continued to work right when it all began. So we have the workplace guidelines in place. We also have been viewing the Safe Schools videos, and right now we know there will be 3 mandatory videos that all employees will be required to watch, which is COVID-19, and it's just about COVID-19, information about it, so they'll be informed. There's the wearing and making of the face masks, which will be another mandatory one, as well as the cleaning and disinfecting, which will be another mandatory one. There will be some optional ones. There's, stress and anxiety. There's how to prepare your household, which would be optional for employees to watch, but mandatory will be the 3 I just named around the COVID-19 and expectations, as well as we have a document that will be going out July 1 to all 12-month employees, and then all employees as they return, is reporting COVID-19. We, thanks to our IT department, have a specific email address where employees will be able to report if they have either tested positive or have a close contact, lots of times within the same household, and have to self-quarantine. They will be able to report it that way, as well as calling HR, but it's a dedicated email so that we will not miss that. We already have in place where an employee can go online, report it, and right away we get an email. We reach out to any employee, follow up and all that. So that's already been in place. We also have ready and have had to use possible exposure to the difference of, do you have known exposure or possible exposure? So we have those documents in place and ready. So all that is ready to go and ready for all employees as they return.
Thank you, Ms. Valdez. With that also, we're going to talk about PPE preparedness and district site levels. I just want to restate the information that we're sharing. We have not made any decisions. What we have tried to do is to prepare for what we think could be imposed upon us. So we don't want to get caught off guard. I said that a couple months ago, that we will go ahead and apply for an AOI platform in the event that we're forced to go to that platform. So we are trying to order things and supplies in the event that it's out of our control and the state tells us what we will do in public education. So that's how we're trying to get ahead, so we're not caught off guard without anything. So that's what we've been doing. So when we talk about the preparedness at the district and site levels when we return, right away, as everybody else in the country is trying to get some of these PPE things and sanitation things that we need. So what we've ordered thus far are hand sanitizer pumps for all staff. We've gone with face shields for staff and students. We went with that because of not knowing whether that would be imposed upon us, but also people that have a difficulty wearing a face mask, perhaps a shield is a better alternative for them. We know for a fact that our nurses who are dealing with those that could have symptoms will have the shield. We've ordered infrared digital thermometers for our nurses to work with staff and students that exhibit symptoms. We've ordered sanitizing wipes for staff. We've ordered Clorox spray machine chemicals that we've ordered. We've ordered spray bottles and disinfectant for all staff. We've ordered the rags for staff and needed. We've ordered cloth masks with plastic windows. We ordered adult disposable masks. We've ordered cloth masks for staff and students. We've ordered cloth gator masks with district logos if we need those as well. We've ordered disinfectant like Lysol. We've ordered social distancing floor and decals so that we can make sure people are going in the right areas for the cafeteria and reception. We've ordered freestanding hand sanitizer stations for all classrooms. We've ordered hand sanitizers for the stations. We've ordered safety glasses for staff. We've ordered reception plexiglass shields for 54 school lobbies. We ordered nitrile gloves for staff. We ordered disposable masks, again, for students. We'd ordered K95 masks for nurses, maintenance, and transportation. We'd ordered Lysol spray, as I said. We've ordered Protexis sanitizing hand shields with sanitizing for 50 buses. We've ordered those same types of backpacks in which you can use to sanitize buses. Those things are the things that we've ordered. Also, unless I didn't see it, but we keep ordering, we ordered water bottles for every student so that they would have a water bottle to bring and that would have their water in it as well. So that's what we've done to be proactive. Some of the things are starting to come in, and then we're hoping that everything gets in time. But those are the things that we've ordered to be proactive and be prepared in the event when we reopen school. So that's that piece on the PPE. Any questions about PPE?
I have just a question. So is it the CARES Act that you can apply for and get reimbursed for these unexpected expenses? And then when do we actually start, applying to get that money so that we can have it back, in our district?
Right. Yes, Mr. Berrigan can answer that with discussion we just had an hour ago.
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, as the superintendent mentioned, this is something that we've been talking about early in the week, and I apologize, the week's a blur. Dr. Lafitte, myself, and Valerie Cadabel had a Zoom-like meeting with DEMA, which is the state agency that's responsible for the military emergency response. So through the federal government, they're getting additional monies through DEMA that we can apply for. It's a very convoluted process. The questions that we had, they could not answer. So I think everything from their perspective was completely fluid. One of the ideas, or what we understood, was that anything that we ordered had to kind of align with PPE-like items, and then the district would be able to receive up to 75% in reimbursables. The question was, how reliable is that 75%? And the answer was, at this point, I can't tell you that you would receive 75% in reimbursement. The other piece to that is what's probably more talked about, and that is the CARES Act monies. Just to kind of give you a rough estimate, I believe that our calculation is about $4.8 million, but because we have to provide the private schools some financial resources, the district receives about $4.6 million. The difference goes to those private schools on behalf of our kids that live within our district boundaries but attend a different educational institution. So it's about 4.6. We're currently monitoring that. The superintendent asked about that, like she said, an hour and a half ago. And when we checked, it still had not been received. But it's something that we're monitoring, and obviously we're keeping track of the costs. And I know that it's something that we're obviously on top of.
Thank you. The next piece is instructional day considerations, and I'll let Dr. Peterson-Carvalho address it, but I want to just say with that, this goes back now based on the governor's executive order, And what we need to think about then is, because we don't have some of the flexibility we thought we had about splitting kids and all those things, and then how do you have enough staff to do that and what that looks like. So how do you still prepare for the safest environment for kids, and that's very important for us. So is it through the PPE? In addition, there are things that, we're falling on CDC that we do. We sit students in rows where they're side-by-side is better, we've learned. Side-by-side is better to do that, keeping them together, giving them their own materials to use so they're not sharing. We have done that. We always give students their supplies, but they will be now contained in a Ziploc bag that only those children have those supplies. So it's those things we're trying to do as well. Also, is it minimizing, it is minimizing contact with others, but is it also looking at what a shortened day looks like to minimize exposure as well? And so those are things we've also talked about. So I'll based on what we received yesterday from the governor's executive order, I'll let Dr. Peterson and Incorvaya talk about what those instructional day considerations might look like as far as a schedule.
Thank you, Superintendent Sagata-Jones. Board members, the state, obviously you know about the 180-day requirement. And so our current school calendar meets that, and it always meets that. And if it didn't, we'd have to go for some sort of request to not do that. But what we really try to focus on are the minutes. So the required minutes for, the most required minutes for a K-8 setting is 890 minutes, 890 hours, right?
Not minutes.
Minutes, hours, days, weeks.
Year ever.
Anyway, it's 890 is the number.
Dr. Peterson and Incorvaya, it will change by tomorrow, so you're okay.
Anyway, so we've been crunching a lot of numbers because we've talked about if we did reduce the school day from 7 hours to some number to at least show that we're trying to reduce contact as much as possible if we didn't do like a split schedule or an AB schedule or anything like that because of the reasons that Superintendent Sagata-Jones said that was outlined in the executive order. We actually could go down to a 5-hour school day and still meet all of our instructional minutes for the school year if we did that every day of the week. So there wouldn't be like 7 hours, Wednesday was a half day, 7 hours, and it would be every day is 5 hours. If we did that, if that's what the decision would be, we would meet our instructional minutes for the school year, if that happened all school year long. Some of the things, we've been using words like modified, temporary, is it really all year long? So those are things we have to constantly keep in mind as well. But what a school day could look like is that it actually allows us to still get all content areas, including related arts, including band, including all the other content areas, plus lunch and breakfast into a school day, and meet those minutes. So we can still do everything we need to do in that time. Now, on the flip side of that, and I would be remiss being the Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services if I said, wouldn't 2 hours help? And I would say yes, because people need to be able to read on grade level. And I think there's ways that we can go about that and creative ways we can make things happen that what Superintendent Sagata-Jones said, like small group reading, we're not going to have 10 kids around a little table anymore doing that. So what do we do about that? And so I think there's some, President Pimentel talked about some professional development for online. There would be professional development obviously as well. How do you teach in a whole class setting and get at exactly what you need to get at for every student? Because it's a different technique and different set of skills to do that. So that's what we want. I want to portray to you is that we can do everything that's legally that we have to legally meet for all content areas and the minutes if we were to go down to something like 5 hours a day, we could make that happen. We would also, we figured out today, Dr. Lafitte and I were at the end of the table with masks on. And we were trying to figure out the numbers of minutes to allow for related arts scheduling, to allow for a prep or a break for teachers, because that's a long day, and lunch. And we can make that, we can do that still within that amount of time. So, and in fact, at the end of the week, what we figured out is, even though your early release day would be increased by 1 hour in order for it all to be 5 hours across the board, if that would be the decision, the teaching staff would actually have, even if they did the collaborative team time after that 5 hours, because they still have a 7 3/4 hour contract day, there would be 6 hours that they would gain to prep for class, to take professional development perhaps on this new learning model that might be occurring. But there's 6, I don't want to call them extra hours, but there's 6 hours that students wouldn't be in front of them that they could use as we need them to use it. So
6 golden hours.
6 amazing hours that there's never enough time, no matter what. But it would be 6 hours of time to be able to use in another way.
So did you say the 5 hours would be within the calendar year?
Yeah, if we were to do it an entire calendar year, we could go to 5 hours for an entire year, and we would meet our instructional minutes for the year still. There's we have about, and I think we may have talked about this a little bit in the spring when closures happened, is that we actually, in our last year's school calendar, and every year since I've been here, we actually have 35 days of time that is over that amount of minutes in our calendar. It's not something you think about unless you truly sit down and look at all the days and multiply it all out, but we actually have 35. So we were always saying if the closure lifted, we would have been okay, except for about a week or two. We would have been okay and still met our minutes last year. So we have about 35 days worth of time to play with.
I just want to make clear, we've not made any decisions, and we'll talk about the timeline, but the reason the conversation has come up, not just in our district, but other district, is minimizing time for staff and students, contact time with each other, right? And that's what it is about, is reducing it to minimizing that time. As you followed everything, the best place to be during this COVID, is at home. But the best place to be also is an outdoor setting with better ventilation. So we would, definitely want to have break. And of course, we live in the worst state to do outside learning right now, right? And so, but it's really about what can we do. That's one of our, what we consider at least part of a PPE, is what can we do to minimize contact time in a confined area for people. So that's an option. But as far as timeline in that, obviously it's dependent upon what comes out next for us, but the distance learning piece has to be defined for us. But we already scheduled, Tuesday will be a meeting with our administrators. We will share with them. Last Tuesday we had the meeting and I had to step out to take the call from the legal counsel, and I stepped back in and said, everything we discussed for 2.5 hours is out the window. And so we'll bring them back on Tuesday with this new executive order. They will have what the options are according to the governor. They will meet with our task force again, give us their input again with different scenarios. This is just our best thinking. With less than 24 hours, we receive this information. So we want to get all the stakeholders, get their opinions as well, their thoughts as well. And then we would want to then be able to move forward with the options. It doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen, but give the options to the community. So our thought would be doing a couple of things, a postcard out, and the email out, the text message out, posting on social media, but a postcard too, because we're not, again, 2,300 responded, and I need to get 7,300 more to respond. So do a postcard mailing that says that you will select your learning environment for next year, whatever that environment might be as an option, and then how many, because it could be that no one selects returning to school or no one selects online learning. So once we know what their options are, we have that data, and then we can come back and make a better decision as well. So that's, we'd like to turn that postcard around very quickly next week once we talk to, we have that information from our task force members and administrators. With that, then the town hall that was scheduled for June 30th, I would recommend there is no purpose to do that right now because we don't have enough information, and I can't answer the questions because I don't know what the offerings are going to be. I would postpone the town hall. What I would do is gather the information from parents about the options that they would want, and then once those options are in there, then we can do the town hall to do any clarifying for parents at that time. But the town hall now isn't going to give us any of the information because we don't have enough. By Tuesday, we're not going to have that to be able to share with them. It would just be unknown answers, which I don't think that's what we want to communicate at this time.
Now I have an observation. So if we have these multiple options, so if we're able to do brick and mortar plus we're able to do online instruction, those two combined will also help with that in-person proximity situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, depending
Board
on
Member Bartels, absolutely, because it could be that if 50% want an AOI, that alone will reduce, and that's what we don't know. What does that actually, what does the social distancing of the 6 feet look like if, and I don't know because I don't know how many are returning, right? What's going to happen? So that's what we're trying to prepare for as well, but that will help us determine as well. It won't affect staffing because we are staff, but it will affect who's going online, and again, it either it won't increase, but it could decrease numbers, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
About the 5 hours a day number, that's an interesting stat. I like that, by the way. Does that leave us any wiggle room if we run into something else coming down the line? If we have another closure, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? We could have, another offshoot of COVID, or we could have another Red for Ed thing where we have to shut down for a week. I mean, how much wiggle room do we build into that 5 hours a day?
So, good question, Mr. Martinez. The reason we played it out for the entire year, and Dr. Peterson and Cabarrus stated that, was because we don't know. But really the intent for us is, as what we listened to today, we know that the numbers are rising, and we know that we have not seen the second wave in Arizona. That's what was told to us today. So with that in mind, if we were trying to best guess things, we're hoping that we would run this modified schedule through January. I mean, if we look at what's happening nationally or whatever, you would run your modified schedule through January, but if all of a sudden you saw a huge decrease, then you could go back and you could change that. But I think and you're right, because we're saying right now there's a pandemic. I don't know what's going to come our way after the pandemic, right? So that's why we would do it as a modified, so that in the event there is another catastrophic event, we would have that leniency as well.
Okay.
All right.
And can I just get some clarification? You said for the year, and I just want to confirm that you're talking about a school year as opposed to an entire calendar year. I mean, I know we've heard calendar year a couple times. Okay, so a school year. All right. One other thing. So I don't want to minimize the idea of trying to not have the kids in close proximity to each other right now. And I have to wonder if we really gain anything by reducing to 5 hours as opposed to 7 hours. I mean, we're sitting smack dab in the middle of the sixth highest COVID infection rate and one of the highest COVID infection rate states. I can tell you, the kids right now would probably be safer in school than they would at their house, because right now people are just getting infected all over the place. Especially when you have protocols in place that require cleaning of all the areas, mass social distancing in a school environment. Right now, may not be being practiced at home. And you have other siblings, you have parents going out to work, you have kids playing for next door, things like that. School has traditionally been a safe place for kids to be, and I would argue that, with proper cleaning procedures, that school might be safer than some people's houses.
And those are good points. That's what we said. We were just looking at all different, what can we do to make also our families feel comfortable as well. Is it a reduce or is it not a reduce? But I want to do a comment on a couple of things, and I think we have to understand this. Kids have not been here. So you can look at the other end of that. When students come and when staff comes, you may see an increase of cases because everybody's coming together, right?
Right.
Because kids could be at home and in a perfectly great environment, and now we're bringing not just students, but we're bringing staff back too. All of us are coming back in large numbers, and then what does that mean? If you look at what happened when we open up, and you see that across states, what happens when large groups get together, right? So it's thinking about how long are you together, and then what does it look like when you are together, and that's why the purpose of the PPE. So yes, definitely things we want to talk about. You don't have to shorten your day, those are just other ways to help people maybe stay safe or healthy. I want to go back to one thing I didn't state with the PPE, and when we also list the things that we ordered, something that we're currently looking at and we'll look at is the janitorial services, and we will take a very different approach to that. So, Mr. Berrigan?
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, I think as the superintendent just pointed out, and I think the conversation that we had at the last board meeting, my team and I, we did meet with 3 different janitorial services. We met 4 additional times related to this issue, and so what we did say to these various janitorial firms that we will be making a decision by the end of this week, and so I'll be regrouping with my team. I've shared some of that with the superintendent and with the executive team, but the whole idea really is that our staff will do what they normally do, and then the whole idea is that this janitorial company will disinfect those common high point areas on a daily basis after school is over, whether it's a 5-hour day or a 7-hour. The whole idea is to give everyone, both the students, the staff, and our community, that reassurance that it's being disinfected at the end of each day. And so that's really what we're working towards. And so we've had, I think, 7 meetings related to this since the last time we spoke. And so we did commit to having a decision made by the end of the week. We could not afford to provide that additional service. The CARES Act monies would really help to offset that expense, because it's not an inexpensive service. It is extremely expensive. And again, that would come out of the CARES Act money. So those are the things that the superintendent has tasked me with, is ensuring that it happens on a daily basis, and that's been what we've communicated to the various janitorial companies, and we'll be making that decision by the end of tomorrow.
Great. Thank you. But I wanted to say something. Escaped me. With the janitorial, here's what I know you're paying attention to everything that's happening. So you might see other school districts using a reduced schedule. Of course, everything's changed after yesterday, but with the idea that they would go 2 days off one day and then back to 2 days because they would do deep cleaning. We plan to do deep cleaning every single day, and that's the purpose of janitorial. Every single day it will be done. Okay?
Can I go back to that 5 hours?
Yes.
Just for a second. That would allow for teachers to get in contact with their students if we ever did that hybrid, what that would look like. Or just check in with, could they check in with the students that are doing online at the same time?
It's a lot of opportunities. It's a lot of opportunities for them as well. And also, the piece with the social emotional piece, I think, is going to be huge for us as well that we need to address. And I know Dr. Lafitte is working on a component. Yes, we talk about staff and students, but moms and dads and grandma and grandpas too, and what does that look like? And that gives you some of that. What does that look like remotely if we can do something for them as well? So all are just options. The next thing under...
I'm sorry, I have a question too. Going back to the 7 instructional hours we currently have, is that, because I really don't know as much about that as I should, is that from the time that they get here to the time that they leave? Does that include breaks, lunch, or is that strictly just classroom time?
Madam President, members of the board, 7 hours is actually bell to bell.
Okay.
So it's, and when I say bell to bell, I mean, because there's multiple bells going on. I don't mean opening of gate, I mean starting of instruction at 7:45 at Landmark, for example, to 2:45 every day. So it does include passing, lunch, related arts, breaks. It just does not include getting off the bus to the classroom or then going to the bus. So it's, when we say bell to bell, we mean students are seated, we're ready to start instruction, and then the ending of instruction.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. And then going back to our timeline for reopening, are we still tentatively on August 10th?
Well, tentatively, we're still on August 10th. I think what we heard today from the governor, you know, our numbers continue to increase. And I think we have to, you know, right now with that timeline, that's how we get all of our 180 days met and instructional minutes met. So yes, we're on time for that now. He can change that for us. And if he does, then we would go with that. But right now, we're, you know, it's 180 days. It's starting at that time. Okay.
Thank you.
Unless we look at alternatives. So we'll just have to continue to monitor what those spikes are. Okay. On number 11 on the board actions, so that we would need, after determining, and we've looked at the executive orders, there will need to be some policy changes, and then also there may need to be a resolution. You did the gave me the authority before. If I needed to close schools, I had the authority to immediate close, and there could be things in which I need to make an immediate decision. Until we know what we're doing, I would work with legal counsel to know what those things might be, to get all those things proactive, so we're not scrambling at the last minute. So that's what that means as far as policy changes in a resolution. Okay. All right. That ends the section on reopening of GSD. Any more questions that we have for that? I know it's a lot of information. Okay. The next request came that we look at the focus discussion on goals, and that was a request by the governing board if we look at goals. So you do have in your packet, and it seems like an eternity when we saw this before, was we took the master plan, it was called before, and it was 5 years, a master plan, and then we were over, I think we were a year and a half before we updated that, and we shared that back in early spring, I believe. So that's what you have in front of you. You have that with what we determined were our goals and strategies, and then you also have in your documents, Educational Services has provided for us the student achievement goals for the 2020-21 school year. So that's the information we have. So we're happy to answer questions or...
We have our strategic plan that's up here on the top, and it has our mission, our vision, and our core values. And I know that you haven't had time to put things up here, but everything that I'm trained on says that we should know our mission, and I'm always asked, do I know our mission? And I don't know our mission off the top of my head. And then as far as our vision, the only one that, you know, I can remember the bottom two parts, you know, the mosaic of minds and all in for all kids, but then, you know, our core values. And I just, you know, as we go forward as part of our strategic plan, I'd really like to have these more up front so that all of us as board members, as communities, that we know what our vision, so when we go out in the community that we're expressing exactly, what the plan is for our district. And so that's what I would just encourage us to put those more up front instead of just being on this.
Absolutely, Board Member Smith. And about when all this happened, and then it was about really how do we launch all this, and then we were dealing with a pandemic. But this is exactly what was all part of that rebranding and revisiting that strategic plan. And we had those committees and all those things, and then it just got, okay, well, here it is, but, we haven't even had a deep conversation about it because we were faced with the pandemic. But absolutely, we should know what our mission and vision, our core values are, and that will be in part of what we do when we do our reopening, and it will always go back to be revisited for us. And just like when schools, they identify what their mission and vision and core values are, they also need to know, and they are aligned to the district, but we all need to know. We should never be caught off guard not knowing what it is, or at least to summarize it. Other questions? I would want to say that the goals, they may change. We know one of the things we wanted to focus on for sure was that staff and student well-being, the social emotional piece, and that was new for us, that was added in there. We have things in there. I think what we have to pay attention to is what does that do to student academic success with what we're dealing with now, as well as what does it do to financial solvency as well, because we're in a situation where we're going to obviously apply and get, hopefully soon, DEMA money or CARES money, but meanwhile that's coming, from our budget. And just to do PPE, we're well over $2 million. You're looking at another $1 million to do janitorial, things like that. And so we know that can be reimbursed. But also, I don't want to, also to forget about the pandemic. We also started the conversation, and then we were in with the pandemic again, was the repurposing and reclosure of schools. That conversation still has to take place. And then also, we also do not know what the financial impact will be based on the pandemic and how many students will actually choose one of our options as well.
So I think that we have these goals, a strategic plan, and it needs to come back. And so, even goal 1, it says student academic success. So if I think about, like whatever, my child, as a whole, it's like, where's her success going to come from, in this pandemic? To me, the success isn't going to be just having the regular classes every day. She needs more, and that's, in my conversations with her, was her favorite part of the day was the RTIs, being able to go places and get the instruction at her level, and and I would hope that when we, go through and we come up with our plans and our instructional plans, that we keep in mind what the strategic plans are, which I'm sure that you do, but that we make sure that all of us, especially as board members, that that we're making sure that those things are still in place, because that is our plan at this time. And then just like you said, our stewardship of resources. During this pandemic, we handed out Chromebooks. Did we get them back? And do we need to make changes to how they're handed out, because that it's not a free gift from our taxpayers. Here's a Chromebook for you to keep and walk away with. And so we do need to make sure that we are good stewards of the resources that we have, and and I think that as we come back, and we need to decide, what's the most important, as a board, coming back to you, say, okay, what's more important, that we just have kids in the classroom, or is it that we have the RTIs? I think that, we need to have those discussions, but, and then, like you said, do we change our, the short-term goals of the strategic plan right now? Because we have to repurpose some schools at this point because of their ADM issues. So, where are we with this, as a board? It's our responsibility, to say this is where we want this, the district to set their priorities. And
I think I think the strategic plan and with it outlines our goals and our strategies. It's not something we create to create. It's a living document, and we always have to refer back to that. So I appreciate that. I think also I want us to remember about while we're in this pandemic, I think we have to believe, at least I want to believe, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that I'm hoping it's gone before January, but I'm trying to look at all the data as well and what it's saying. So I think we need to remember it's going to be a little different for students and staff and parents for a little bit, for a while, as our lives have been different since about March. But we will get back to normalcy, and our kids will get back to what we knew public education to be before, what their classroom used to look like. But right now, it's just very different for everybody, and we need to do the best that we can with that, but knowing that we're going to still provide the best services we can for students. I have 100% confidence in our teachers that they will be very creative in what they do and how they will deliver instruction to kids. They miss their students dearly, and they want their students back. At least the majority is telling us that. Even through the task force committee, they said they just want the kids to come back, and we want them back. So I think teachers, you tell them, here they're back, and you're in front of the class. They're going to be very creative on what they do with their instructional practices, and our kids are still going to achieve. It's just going to look different, but I have 100% confidence in our teaching staff. Any other questions? Comments?
As far as the goals go, were you still looking at changing what we had? Is that what you wanted?
I think that if you look down here and it says student success, and then it says the strategies underneath it, I think as a board that we need to it goes back and forth, okay? We're saying don't have SMART goals, do have SMART goals. I think we need to have SMART goals. And I think that when you say, student academic success, we should be looking, when I said, understanding what the data is and what is going on in this district. And we should say, all right, I'm just going to choose something, out of the air. It's, okay, we looked and we saw that as a district that there is, an issue, I'll just go with the political climate, with, let's say our Hispanic, students. Our Hispanic students are, have the gap, so we should, know, like this, maybe that's our goal, our specific goal, instead of just saying provide curriculum and instruction with multi-tiered systems of support. Yeah, that I understand that they're going to do it, but I think that as a board that we should be a little bit more specific, and say, look, we really want you to, focus on the, the Hispanic, population, because we see that there's, a huge gap right here, just, like that, instead of, so they know that when we want them to, to spend their money on it, to do whatever, so it's like, so that's really, so. And we don't really have that set up in any place. I think, Ms. Sagada-Jones, they do a great job, bringing the information, showing us the areas, but is that, they could focus on 10 areas, but, as a board, we're like, we really feel like, area, A needs to be worked on instead of area, D. And we want the money focused on A, not D. And those are the conversations, that we really don't have as a board, and those are the conversations that we should have, as a board with the administrative team. And we don't have those. So, so do we go back to the strategic plan? Well, yeah, I think that at some point we do.
right now is not the time. I'm sorry, I know it's not the time. There's other things that are more important at times. So, when Ms. Agata-Jones said, when it gets back to normal, yeah, when it gets back to normal, then I think we come back to this, and then we dig a little bit more into what's down here, and then that way the direction is set. And so then our human resources is going to know, this is what we want, for you to look this type of a person, because we need this type of a person to do this type of need. It all comes together.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and then with the as far as goals and that, if you look at educational services goals for what the focus is across the district, you have the district goals as set in SMART goals, and then schools will set theirs that way as well. As far as if we're looking at whatever diverse populations, we did that in the past to show the growth in that, so just bear in mind when we do that, every school looks different, and depending on their different populations, so it will never be the same because our populations are different. So we have to keep that in mind. But if we know that is and what we've always tried to do, if we see that as, for example, it's what now, 6 years ago, that we first looked at the goals, Dr. Peterson and Carvalho and I did, it was very clear to me that English language learners, there was a huge gap. And so everything was focused on that and to help to close those gaps. So I think those things happen at this level. And then also, it's then at the school level, what are you doing dependent on your school for those populations that have been identified to do. We do look for those trends, both also for example, in our special education population, as well as our gifted population. And then those goals look very different at each of the 17 sites based on their schools' data and their populations as well. So those are the deeper conversations we have as well. So I think it's just sharing that information, and then also really there's nothing wrong to ever go back and look at what those priorities are. I think, I'm hoping that we will not see any achievement gaps with our students, but I know that what has occurred, even though they learned all or were exposed to all their standards from prior to the pandemic. We also know we spent the time from March, even though third quarter had ended and they received the essential standards, we spend March to May doing either enrichment or refining those standards that they didn't meet, and we did not have that opportunity. Mm-hmm. So we are aware there are gaps. So I think what we do when we get kids back, and we'll get some information on the benchmark that we give, that we'll see where some of those gaps are, and then what do we do to help close those gaps. And things could very well change, at any point. And that's why even though the strategic plan is set for a 5-year period, it's not that you don't revisit it until 5 years from now. It's revisited, quite frequently as well. So thank you for that input.
I just have one question really quick. So how does seeing this documentation here and the strategic plans and the goals, how does this information, and does it in any way actually get out to the parents in our district? How does me as a parent, how do I know what is the strategic plan for the district other than the snippets on the Twitter, the mosaic of the minds and the all in for all kids? I think it seems to me anyway, it seems there was a disconnect between what I see as a parent and then what I see as a board member. What I see as a parent, there are certain things I don't understand. For example, when Discovery got the PLC award, I'm sorry, I had no idea what PLC was. I had to go find the website that was on a link somewhere that took me to a website, and I had to dig in that website to find out what the heck PLC was. And so when we advertise things that, hey, Discovery is a PLC school, awesome.
What is it?
What the heck does that mean? To me, it means absolutely nothing unless I really kind of dig in there, and I have to want to go after it. And I think when we make that approach and we make those communications out and we post on the social media, I think we need to not just, hey, here's a snippet of information. If you're interested, go find more. I think we need to hit them over the head with it. look, we got PLC. This is what it means. We are professional. We got professional learning going on in spades all over the place. We're nationally recognized. And I think there needs to be a better communication of that out to the parents as to exactly what the district is doing to enhance its school sites and the learning opportunities for not only the staff here, but for the children as well.
I always thought that things like that should be on the website, and going into detail. And when there's a, celebration like that, Discovery should have that on their website and actually should explain it, a little better. So maybe the websites could be a little more in depth.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely, we appreciate that feedback. I think we can always do better in the communication piece. When we were identified as the all things PLC district as well, and remember that we did that presentation at the board meeting and at sites, but I'm not going to blame it on the pandemic, but we can't bring Discovery here, but we wanted to get the information out, and we wanted to make the announcement before PLC made that announcement. But yeah, what can we do so that parents truly understand that? In the normal setting, there would have been, I know that Ms. Size would have done a huge celebration for parents and students and staff, but it's the situation in which we're in. But that doesn't mean that we can't do a better job at providing what those things are when we receive those awards. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Okay, that would conclude the study session. So then we would move into the board meeting.
Okay, we are at item 5, consent agenda. Are there any items board members would like pulled for review?
I'd like to pull D.
That was D as in David?
D as in David.
Okay. Go ahead and make a motion to adopt the consent agenda, setting aside item 5D for discussion.
I'll second.
We have a second?
I'll second.
Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Ms. Bartels?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, approving consent agenda holding item 5D.
All right, so on the extracurricular fee schedule, I was reading that those students that, could not put forth the fee, that there would be tax credits that, could cover. So I just want to get it out there that no child would ever be turned away, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Bergen, anything?
Madam President, members of the board, I think Board Member Wilson summarized it beautifully.
No, absolutely.
100% agreed.
I think it should be brought up again, that with these fees that are out there and then no one getting turned away. I think it's somewhere it needs to be stated, that so that as parents, that when something comes to us and we know that there's a fee that they're not going to be turned away. That's just some of those equity things that, that we see all the time in our trainings is saying, you just need to make sure, that Joe doesn't stay home because he doesn't have the money and he's not going to tell you about it. So just, that was good to bring that up, of that those fees can be waived if there's needs.
Absolutely.
That's all I have. I think that's great. It's especially during this time when things are being a little bit thinner than normal. Okay, then do we have a motion to accept item 5D?
Well, I'll move to approve item 5D.
I'll second.
Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. We are at item 6, reports and information. Mrs. Sagata-Jones.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, we will present, Ms. Debbie Valadez will present to you principal and teacher evaluation ratings.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones. I have the pleasure of presenting the teacher and principal evaluation performance update this evening. This is aligned to our policy GC O, as well as state statute, that we make this presentation annually to the board. All right. This first slide shows you the teacher evaluation instrument. And as you can see, it has the two components, the 67%, which is the actual classroom performance, and then the 33%, which is the student achievement data. So let me go back one. So on the actual classroom observation, these are the 5 domains that are looked at on the teacher observation, teacher evaluation instrument. So the facilitation, engagement, environment, planning, and professionalism. And within those 5 domains, there are elements. So under facilitation, there's 8 different elements that are looked at. Under engagement, there's 4 different elements. 6 elements under environment, planning has 8 elements, and professionalism has 6 elements that are looked at. Oh, absolutely.
I just want to say something that would help us in the future on these. Can we just do it in white ink instead of black because we can't really read it?
On this part. Oh,
on this part.
gotcha.
If you could just help us.
Oh my God, I thought I was the only one. I can't read this.
I'm like, does yours look different than mine?
Oh, no, it's very dark.
Oh, I guess yours is a little, absolutely. I see what you're saying now that I'm looking at Dr. Lafitte's. Absolutely on that one. Thank you. Under the school data part and the growth part, these are the components that are looked at there. The school letter grades, the parent survey data, the ELL reclassification, AZ merit, and the classroom or school AZ merit growth and or proficiency. But really it's going to, AZ, well, it's really from last year's data because we didn't take it this year. So that's just rolling over from this last year. These are the results of the teacher evaluation, final classification ratings, and you can just see it's broken up into those 4 categories: highly effective, effective, developing, and ineffective. Now, the principal evaluation instrument, again, has the 2 components, the 67% as well as the school data. That includes the same components as you saw in the teacher evaluation. Again, the principal has the different standards here, or different domains that are looked at, and these are the different ones for the principal evaluation. And again, within those, there are other elements that fall into those as well, that are looked at when the principals are being evaluated. The school data part, the growth data part, as seen before on the teacher one, it plays into the principal evaluation, their final classification as well. And then here's the final classification ratings of the principals. And that concludes the presentation of the overall evaluations of teachers and principals. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So when going back to teachers, we have 3.5% that are developing. Would that be a teacher that's new, or why would someone be developing?
It's based on, out of those 5 domains and all those elements, they get ratings. So they could have gotten maybe a developing rating in whatever areas. So all those components, those 5 domains and the elements, all come together to get an overall rating. So maybe they were having to work on student engagement. So maybe that was a developing area. But then maybe another area was effective. So all those components get compiled together, and that gives them their observation rating, their 67%. Then the data part gets put in with that 33%, to give them an overall rating.
Does not necessarily mean it's a new teacher.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
So once there's that developing rating, when are they rated again to possibly come up to effective?
As long as they return to GESD, it would be the following year.
Okay. Thank you.
The evaluation is yearly. If you're 3 years or less as a teacher, you get 2 observations, and the 2 observations make up your 67% of your evaluation. If you're more than 3 years and have had positive evaluations, then you have you have to have 1 observation. You could have 2, but you definitely, if you do well on your first observation, if you're effective or highly effective on your observation, the second one may be waived.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Thank you. And we'll definitely work on the ink. Thank you.
Okay, Madam President, members of the board, we now will move to the proposed 2021 expenditure budget. Mr. Berrigan.
Madam President, members of the board, can you guys hear me okay? Madam President, members of the board, I do want to point out before I start that if you look at the PowerPoint presentation, it is in white font. And so hopefully it won't be an issue as we go through this presentation. I promise I will make it short. The superintendent had me cut down my presentation from like 40 slides to about 9, so we'll get through this. I think it is important to show you kind of the path that we've taken, what is technically still this current school year. You might recall that I usually kind of give you where we revised the budget last year and what the proposed was. So this visual here before you is a little bit different. It's going to have all the various revisions, beginning with the adopted budget, revised number 1, revised number 2, revised number 3. And mainly it's so that you can see what I've been calling or referring to the financial roller coaster through the year. I've said this multiple times, I think, in this type of setting that, financial folks, we like predictability, we like certainty, and when we don't have it, it makes us a little nervous. But really, as we're talking about this, I do want to point out that we're constantly thinking about the strategic plan. And so, for example, when you look at the strategic plan that Mrs. Smith was talking about, when you look at goal 2, we're always thinking about the solvency. And so when you look at the relationships between the trust board and what we presented there and what we presented in your board updates, how this really ties back to this is that it really is something that all has to come together, and they're all equally important. And so that's part of the reason that you see it this way, is because we will not downplay the seriousness of our financial situation and how we have a responsibility to our community to be to be fiscally responsible. Again, the other side to this presentation is really the decrease in enrollment. I think it's important that we understand this. We've shared this in this environment, in this setting, but we've also, the demographic study has also been shared with the trust board, because the relationship between the trust board and the governing board is critical so that we can achieve these strategic goals. This particular slide just shows you that from 2001 to what the budget is now based on is $10,500. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the budget may change because of potentially the various alternative instruction methods, and we'll get to that a little bit towards the end. But right now we projected $10,500. It does not include or reflect what COVID may or may not do to the district's enrollment. And so we projected that from the 100th day this year to the proposed budget, you're just short of about a 2.9 decrease. The demographic study reflected a 2.8. Just a side-by-side from the last revised budget, specifically to capital, to what we're proposing for next year, you can see that there's about $360,000 difference. Overall, the biggest difference being the budget balance carry forward. We're actually spending a little bit more in capital than what we projected, and so that's probably the biggest difference. I always like to kind of just hopefully put it in perspective and point out what's happened. The calculation for the district additional assistance is $4.8 million. As you guys I know that you guys know this because of your involvement with all the various ASBA and the emails. Capital has been restored, but not accelerated, right? So you're looking at a reduction of about 16%. Previously it was about 32. So of that 4.8, 4.9, we have about $4 million or so, 4.1 available. But the total reduction from 2009 to 2020 is almost $42 million, and that's straight cut in the most simplest form. That number could grow if we were to include the state no longer funding, full day K. That's not even included in this, right? So this is a straight cut. About 93% of that overall reduction is specific to capital, and I think, you might get tired of hearing me say that with what's being cut from capital, we could have built 2 brand new schools, right? So just again, want to always put that in perspective. Part of the requirement in proposing a budget also includes the truth and taxation hearing. We wanted to show this, and I think since we've been here, we wanted to show you a side-by-side on June 27th, which I believe is this week. Saturday. In the Glendale Star, that you will show the truth and taxation hearing notice, and it shows that it's $36.18. And the way the statute reads, and I explained this earlier to one staff member, I think it's very misleading, because it says that had we not levied for this, it would have been $34.49. What I try to always give the other side of that argument or that picture is that you're a taxpayer, you live in the district. You currently are paying $38.26 for every $100,000 that your home is worth. Next year, it's going to be $36.18. So really, it's a reduction of $2 and some change versus an increase of $1.60. So we feel it is important that the board understand how, in isolation, that notice is very, very misleading. And so what is it in the prior year compared to the subsequent year? And in reality, it's a decrease of about $2 and some change. So something that we think is very important that the board and the community understand.
And that has to do with the amount of money that the district receives, or
This is a very, very small portion of the overall tax rate calculation. This is specific to really the portion that is outside of, like the adjacent ways is mainly what this is covering. So it's a very small piece of the overall tax rate, very specific to this item. Statute requires that this be broken out specifically in this manner.
Okay, just for clarification, is the difference between those two numbers because of the bond and override, or no?
This amount specifically takes various factors into consideration. If I remember correctly, this also takes kind of like the assessed values within the district. And so as that amount increases, theoretically speaking, every person in the district that's a taxpayer actually pays less. So as assessed values go up, bond capacity increases. There's a very complicated formula, but in short, if your home is worth, $100,000 or $200,000, you would double that. In reality, it's a $2 and some change less in the subsequent year or in the new year than it is in the current year. And that's the part maybe that I'd love for everyone to take away from is, in reality, next year is going to be $2 less. It doesn't mean that it's an actual increase. But if you look at it, just the way that it's written, it implies that. And you have to understand the other side to that argument.
So does that have to do with the assessment of your house?
It takes various factors into consideration, not just your house, but of the property values within the district. So as those property values rise,
Tax goes
your
down.
tax, there's more liability to go around, and it reduces your tax rates. Tax rates can go higher, but what you're paying out of pocket could be less. So it's something that, ironically, that the county superintendent's office helps us with, and they provide some information that is needed to make or to put this together, in addition to the overall tax rate, which in the overall tax rate does bring in your bonds and your overrides and all the various equalization formula factors into that. The one thing that we wanted to point out, as the superintendent talked about some of the information from the executive order, the fiscal year 21 budget, you might be familiar with somewhat of the slide where I said there are no financial safeguards. Depending on what options, and I'm going to refer you to the CARES Act that the superintendent and Ms. Powell provided in that folder, I believe it's page 7, it talks a little bit about potential protecting school districts from declining too much. And so they've kind of set a ceiling so that you don't exceed that, depending on what type of method the district has chosen to deliver instruction. So I've kind of summarized that in that manner. What's important, this budget is specifically the brick and mortar approach. Should we do something different, variations of instruction, the budget itself, you may not see necessarily a difference on what we present, but for us it changes a lot, and it also impacts what IT does when it relates to student attendance. Again, just capital funding is restored but not accelerated. Reduction in grants, increasing enrollment. This might help overall. We'll wait and see how COVID-19 and all the various factors, what that means enrollment-wise. And then demographic studies ongoing, as you well know, and then just some of these other factors that we're always keeping, that we're mindful of. And then again, the combination of declining enrollment on its own and then coupled with or combined with COVID, it's anyone's best guess. And so, it's something that we're monitoring. Madam President, members of the board, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question, and you don't have a crystal ball, so you may not be able to answer it. I don't even know how to ask it. How much of a buffer do we have for anything ongoing? I don't even know how to ask the question, but...
Madam President, members of the board, ironically, we just had that conversation right before we were watching the governor's press release, shortly before that. That's where that predictability, not knowing, makes us uncomfortable. And what we've done as one strategy is what we presented or we communicated to you in the board memo update is the way that we're going to pay our medical insurance this next year. Just to give you an idea, it's about over $10 million. We've always paid that up front. And so instead of paying $10 million, we're going to pay $7 million up front, see where enrollment is. If enrollment decreases beyond what we've projected at 10,500, then we're going to be forced of not paying the remaining balance of the insurance, which allows us that $3 million buffer to not overspend our budget. The reason we can do that is really to the work that the trust board has done in building reserves. Had we not have those reserves, we'd be in a very difficult position. So it really goes back to strategically bringing all these various factors together to make the district stronger. So I do commend the trust board for those efforts while providing reasonable medical insurance. That's just one example. The other piece is creating or setting aside about $1.3 million that we would typically spend in capital. We're not allocating that out to departments or to school sites. What we're saying is we're going to hold on to that. Should a decrease in enrollment be greater than that, or there's an expense for whatever reason, towards the end of the year, we'll move it back into M&O so that we break even. And we've had other strategies, such as moving expenses from M&O to classroom site fund, instructional improvement, and whatever else we've kind of noted. So it's a combination of factors, and it really goes back to our strategic planning. It really goes back about being solvent. And so it's really, I think in our practice, in our actions every day, in our discussions, we do demonstrate how those strategic goals need to be met, because I think it would be unfortunate if we couldn't be solvent, because at the end of the day, our kids suffer, and that's not a position we ever want to be in. So there's not just one factor, there's multiple factors, and the question is that sufficient? And the answer is, I don't know.
Thank you.
And then the other piece of that is if we do have to tap into those dollars, that's one time.
Madam President, members of the board, those are short-term solutions, and so I believe we've communicated that pretty consistently in those board updates, that those are short-term strategies. As a district, those decisions need to be made on how the long-term goal and how do we become financially solvent, because as you well know, the next 9 years also shows an additional 14% decline over 9 years, and that's a challenge in itself.
Is there any other discussion? Do we have a motion to approve item 7A?
I motion to approve item 7A for the expenditure budget for 2021.
I'll second.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. We are now on item 7B.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, it is recommended the governing board approve the recommendation to change the Executive Director of Behavioral Health and Student Safety to Assistant Superintendent for Behavioral Health and Student Safety, and to add the Assistant Superintendent salary schedule and benefits salary and benefits commensurate with other Assistant Superintendents. The recommended change is the result of an increased responsibility, supervision, and additional duties to the Executive Director position. The increased responsibilities and duties align with current best practices of ensuring a multidisciplinary approach to emergency preparedness, response, and recovery, and to initiate the GSD Emergency Health and Operation Plan in the event of local, state, or national health and/or safety emergencies.
Do we have any discussion? Any questions?
I think under the circumstances, this, walking into COVID, and like I said at our last meeting, this is our third pandemic in the last 2 decades, so chances are we'll be going through something again. You need people that can make decisions as those decisions need to be made. Even today, you're talking about changes. Every time we get online, we're seeing a different direction from somebody higher up that changes the course of what we do.
Any other discussion? Do we have a motion to approve item 7B?
I'll move to approve item 7B.
I'll second.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. We're moving on to item 7C.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, it's recommended the governing board approve the first reading of revised policy GBEB staff conduct as presented. Dr. Lucifete, would you explain this change for us, please?
Madam Chair, members of the board, so the recommendation for this change is because there was a misalignment between what the staff policy currently reads and how it aligns with Arizona State Revised Statute. Arizona Revised Statute is pretty clear in the requirements or the conditions that must exist for child restraint to be incurred. So at this point, that doesn't align with the current schedule, so the recommendation is that that change be made.
Are there any questions or discussion? Do we have a motion to approve item 7C?
I'll move to approve the first reading of GBEB.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, the motion passes. We are now on item 7D.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, it is recommended the governing board approve the payment of the superintendent's 5% increase in pay for the 2020-21 school year to be paid as a one-time stipend to be donated to the Glendale Uniting Students, Teachers, and other educational foundations.
Is there any questions or discussion?
I think this would be good for Ms. Agata-Jones to reiterate how this came about in the first place so that our public understands behind this.
How Gusto came about, or?
How a couple of years back when staff got a raise.
Oh, yes. 2 years ago, I believe, when we began the 10%, my first year as a superintendent, I asked the same thing, the governing board, please take my 10% and allow me to give that to Gusto. I again last year asked the governing board to please give my increase to me in a lump sum so that I could give it to Gusto. And again, I'm asking please to give my 5% increase so I can give it back to Gusto.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you for that. I think it's a really good move on your part, and I think it's, just something that not every superintendent would do. So thank you for that.
It's my pleasure.
And I think it's important that our staff and our community understand that the great things that foundation have been able to do over the last couple of years, you were a big reason for that being possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm honored to do that, to be able to give back to the organization that has given me so much. Thank you.
I'm going to make a comment as well. I thank you for your generosity, and I know that it makes a big impact.
Thank you.
Is there any-
I would be remiss if I didn't get a chance to add something. As the current board president of the Augusta Foundation, that initial donation from Ms. Sagana Jones really kind of jump-started the foundation. It not only set the precedent for what we could do as an organization, but also set a goal for things that we can have happen in the future. And currently, right now, and with that jumpstart and what things that were able to happen as part of the foundation, had that huge fundraiser back in March that was well received and very successful, along with a lot of business partners in the community. And I dare say none of that would have happened if we did not get that jump start from our superintendent. And it really kind of puts your money where your mouth is. So anyone can talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk to the cost of several $1,000s. You see who really rises to the top. And I think you've kind of shown us your commitment to the district.
It's my pleasure.
Any other discussion? Can I get a motion to approve item 7D?
I'll move to approve the superintendent's salary going to Gusto.
I'll second.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
I will abstain.
Mrs. Bartels?
Aye.
Mrs. Wilson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. Again, thank you very much. Moving on to item 7A. Excuse me, 8A.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, the governing board will discuss the governing board's goals, norms, and commitments.
And I ask that we bring this back because we do have, even if it is finishing out a term and we don't know what will happen in the election, so we do have Mr. Martinez here and we should revisit these annually just to make sure we're still on the same page, that there's not a change in who believes what that looks like, how it should be handled. So I don't know if Mr. Martinez ever saw these.
I did not.
Oh, there you go.
I think we were here for 4 hours on a Saturday, and we did some good work on this. I think this came out really well. So I agree. I think it's a good idea to bring it back. I think it's interesting when speaking to other board members, they don't have this, and they're interested in hearing what we have. So do we want to read them out loud? I'll go through them. Governing board norms. For the purpose of enhancing teamwork among members of the board and between the board and the administration, we, the members of the school district senior leadership team, do hereby publicly commit ourselves collectively and individually to the following norms. 1, come prepared to board meetings. 2, align decisions with adopted board policy. 3, adhere to established lines of communication. 4, support board decisions. 5, consider recommendations from administration. 6, conduct business in a professional manner. 7, follow the adopted meeting agenda. 8, adhere to Arizona open meeting law. And 9, agree to hold board members accountable for their actions. So I'll stop there if there's any discussion we need to have with 1 through 9.
I don't know if Mr. Martinez even knows what the established lines of communication are. Do you know?
Don't talk to anybody but Cindy or Liz. That's pretty much it.
And you know how to get things put on the agenda?
Yes, I do think.
Okay.
And ask questions ahead of time.
Yes, ask questions ahead of time. The agenda will come out the week prior. Try to get them in by Monday morning so they have time to prepare. And if we need to make any agenda changes, that'll be the time to do it.
Wow, sounds like somebody prepped him.
See, he actually did number 1, came to a board meeting prepared. So, that's your biggest hurdle right there, right?
No, this was my biggest hurdle today.
All right, is there any other discussion over 1 through 9? Moving along, we'll go to the governing board collective commitments. And we have 16 of those. 1, agree children's interests come first. 2, set clear goals for themselves for us, ourselves, I guess I should say, and the superintendent. 3, conduct an annual self-assessment evaluation. 4, review and continuously update district policies. 5, agree that an individual board member will not take a unilateral action. 6, agree the board president is the spokesperson for the board. 7, avoid words and actions that carry a negative impression on an individual, the board, the district, or the community. 8, actively listen to all speakers, presenters. 9, agree that we can disagree and use common courtesy and respect for others. 10, adhere to board policy in handling all communications with staff and community members. This is policy BHC, board communication with staff members. BHD, board communications with the public. 11, agree board meetings are for decision-making, actions, and focused discussions. 12, will not play to the audience. 13, agree to speak to the issues on the agenda. 14, engage with the community to promote the district's mission, vision, and goals. 15, defer to the superintendent for clarification on agenda items. And 16, adhere to policy BEDBA, board agenda preparation and dissemination. Is there any questions or discussion?
You know, we have up there where we used to sit. I don't know if we will ever sit there again, but we had a little plaque that has the norms and the commitments, and maybe we could get those back here.
Yes.
So that it's just a good reminder for us when we are sitting at a board meeting.
Absolutely.
And there's been some of us that have not been hesitant to say, hey, we're not speaking to the agenda. We need to come back and focus again. And so that's something that I don't think any of us should hesitate to do. So that's a good thing as well. Is there any further discussion? Okay, well, we're moving on to item 8B.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, the governing board and administration will share a learning gain from attending the ASB Summer Leader Institute, which was the virtual institute if you participated in.
Did anyone participate, please?
We did.
Of course you did.
She rose her hand, but I'm going to go because you looked at me. They had 3 hours or 2.5 hours on 2 different Wednesdays where they just went over some basics for school governance. And I'm just going to highlight one of them that I thought that we should learn as a board. So one of the things that they brought up was advocacy and how that we should go about as a board to advocate our priorities. And they had shared during these webinars that that's the way that other districts go about talking about how you're going to advocate the needs of our district. And I'm just going to share, Brenda and I just received in the mail this week our 2019 Pillar Award for advocating for this district, but when we went and advocated for this district, we didn't go in with the full board and the administration's focus. We did ask what would be some of the things they would want us to do, but I really feel that as a board that if we're going to go and advocate for Glendale Elementary district, that we need to speak as the board, not as individuals. And so other districts have advocacy committees, that may be something, that we may want to set up in the future so that we know when you put your strategic plan and you look at what's going on, and that they will focus on some of the bills that are out there, and they can say, as a board, when we go out, and I know that all of us go out and advocate for this district and for the people in our community, that we're focused on the same thing, and that we're doing it as a board and not as individuals. I think that as individuals, we cannot put our name out there and say, oh, I'm a board member and this is what the board wants, unless the board has said that's what the
what the direction is of the board, and I really think that we need to be careful in doing that, so that we know that we're, you know, it was in our norms here, where it said that we will speak, you know, as part of the board and not as individuals, and so that's just what I wanted to share from some of the learning.
Yeah, there was a lot that was still the same stuff. There was more focus, I think, on, of course, COVID-19 and how fluid that is. Getting as many voices together, because I may be more comfortable, so my concern level's not going to be the same, but the person next to me might be a little totally different reality than I have, and you need to hear those different voices, and plus the more voices you have, sometimes things you never even thought of will come to light. You're like, oh, we need to look at that. So, I mean, that was also another big push, considering the climate right now, as well as, you know, making sure we're kind of reevaluating. You know, if we do have to do anything online, we need to kind of, how is that working? How are we knowing it's working? How are we, you know, how are the kids doing with that? Plus, of course, the mental piece, especially right now. You know, we've just had a really rough year, and we're not even done with it.
Right.
Okay. Were there any questions for either Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Bartels? Thank you for the information. I unfortunately forgot. My calendar has my calendar just has big, giant Sharpie lines through it, so I know what day it is. So I wanted to attend, but I didn't.
Well, you're ahead of us. I don't even know what day it is half the time.
I don't either. I that's
have to look at my phone to figure out what day it is.
That doesn't help usually either. So moving on to item 9, future meetings and events.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board. So we have on there June 30th. We talked about the town hall. I'd like to change that to a later date once we know more. And then July 9th, we will have the board meeting because we have the expenditure budget, which has to be, so we'll continue with that. I'm going to ask one more time to take the first 2 items, the performance criteria and the evaluation instrument, and push it to July 23rd, because July 9th, we will have a lot to deal with still with the reopening of schools. Okay. And so I would ask just push it to the 23rd. I'm hoping by, I shouldn't say, I'll probably jinx us. I'm hoping by July 9th we know what we're doing as far as reopening and the times. But I just think we need to devote, if we need extra time for that, and just push those others that aren't time sensitive right now to July 23rd.
Are there any questions?
I have something that I'd like to put on our calendar, just kind of what I spoke about is probably in probably January. Let's do January, is that we can have a discussion about where our advocacy focus will be.
That'd be great.
Also, possibly, we've never really done this per se, but we know no matter what, there's a high probability that there will be a new person on our board after the November election. So somehow, if we can have an opportunity to invite, you know, if it is a new person, invite them in so we can kind of start getting that onboarding process going.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Are we still, for the town hall on the 27th, is that still going to be a tentative?
That's tentative. I would assume now that we would just have one town hall, and the 27th would be removed.
Okay.
The 30th is removed, right?
The 30th is removed, and we'll change that to July.
Okay. Is there anything else anybody else wants to add? No other requests? Okay. Then moving on to item 10, summary of current events. Mrs. Sagata-Jones.
Well, the summary of current events was, I believe, the study session. So, you know, that's where all of our time has been devoted to, is preparing for returning to school and making sure that we're trying to provide the safest environment for staff and students in doing that. So that pretty much concludes my report.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith?
I just want to thank each of the administrative team and whoever's underneath you that's been helping you, because I know there's more that are working on all of these plans that are getting formed at this time. And I look forward to being able to communicate what we can offer real soon. And I just can't thank you enough this is so much work and not a lot of time to do it. So again, thanks.
Mr. Martinez?
I just wanted to take a moment to, first of all, I want to again congratulate Discovery for your PLC award. Great job. Not saying that because my kids go to school there, but my kids go to school there, and cool job. Also, thank you to all the people that worked on the task force to put together all this information. You know, they kind of say the devil's in the details, and when you go through here, you see all the little things that have to adjust because of what's going on right now. Because 2020 is just not shaping up like we originally thought. Absolutely would not recommend to do again. And last thing, I'd just like to end on, for God's sake, please wear a mask when you're out. I know it's the law, and I know it's the proclamation, and there's a city law, and there's a county law. Wear the masks. They're easy enough to fit. You know, they have a whole bunch of, I probably have a dozen now. I've collected them like, I don't know, Funko Pops or Troll Dolls or whatever it is people collect now. So wear your mask, wear it out, be safe, wash your hands, and be careful. That's all.
Thank you. Mrs. Bartels?
Well, I don't envy you guys in the work that you're doing and the fact that it changes daily. I see the same emails and videos, and it's like it's bad enough right now keeping your day straight. Now we can't keep any of the reports that come out straight. I would like to remind everyone, including those young people that think they're totally safe from this virus, please, 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 common sense, wash your hands, keep your distance, just keep things just a little bit relaxed right now, just so that we can slow the spread of this. We do not have a vaccine in place yet to help those that cannot fight it off.
Thank you. Mrs. Wilson?
I too would like to thank you and all the work that you've done in your team. I know there's a lot of work to do yet.
It truly is the team. It's you have, as you know from the task force, you saw it. We've got student input, we have parent input, we have our teachers' input. They've been remarkable for us, and we have, of course, our leadership team as well. But it's we can't thank those people enough for the work that they do, and they'll continue to do that work for us, and we'll continue to seek their input.
Yeah, which I wanted to thank the teachers that took their time for the
Absolutely.
comments. I read through those, and the schools too that got their safety committees together, and that was quite enlightening to read, and to know that they went into the depth that they did.
Yeah.
And I've seen and listened to other districts that are putting out their protocol for opening schools. Some of them did it weeks ago, and others are doing it just now. And all I can say is I think we're doing it the right way. We're taking our time and really thinking things through and moving forward, knowing that it might change,
Mm-hmm.
And I know the teachers are anxious to know what's going on, but when they do, it'll be the right way, and so I'm just very confident and very proud that we're doing it the way we are.
Thank you.
I'm going to piggyback on everything everyone said. Thank you to this team. Amazing. This study was so in-depth, and I'm really proud of our community for responding. In speaking to other board members, their numbers in a much larger district were just a fraction of what ours are. So I think that we got, even though we didn't get 100%, I think we got a really good sampling. So thank you all for your work that you've put into this. I've spoken to friends who are parents in other districts, and like Mrs. Wilson said, they said, oh, our district's going to do this. What's your district doing? And I said, we are weighing everything, and our team is amazing. So thank you for all the work everyone's doing. Thank you for all the teachers that we know you're waiting with bated breath, and as Mrs. Sagata-Jones has said, I can say something right now, and in 2 minutes it'll be different. So thank you all. Everyone, please be safe. I will be home in my backyard on the 4th of July, and if I go anywhere, I wear a mask. So I'd like to echo the sentiments. Please be safe, and this is time for adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Everyone have a great evening. Be safe.